Thank you so much, Robert, for the warm welcome, and thank you for having us today. This is proving to be such a fascinating topic for a study day, and I think well overdue. So it's really, really brilliant to be here to hear the amazing papers and to be able to talk ourselves about sensing Naples. Just by way of introduction, my name's Amy Orrock, and I'm a tall white woman in my mid-40s. I've got long blonde blondie red hair, and I'm wearing a blue dress. And I'll just hand over to Annelise.
I'll do my description as well at the same time. So I'm a slightly less tall woman in their late 40s, and I have more brown hair. I'm wearing glasses and a stripy top.
Thank you. And we're going to do, as Robert said, a bit of a double act today, and we're going to try and cover in 25 minutes the kind of genesis of this project, how it came about, how we delivered it in 2023, and then the kind of ongoing legacy at Compton Verney. So wish us luck as we whiz through that. But I'm going to start by talking about the challenge. So why we undertook this project in the first place, why we wanted to bring the senses into the gallery. If you haven't been to Compton Verney before, then do go. It's only about 30 miles south of here in beautiful rolling Warwickshire countryside. It's an art gallery in a country house with 6 different collections and over 100 acres of landscape grounds and a really vibrant programme of changing exhibitions and events. And it's also home to one of the largest collections of Neapolitan artworks in the UK. The reason for that is this man, Compton Verney's founder, the businessman and philanthropist Sir Peter Moores. And the permanent collections at Compton Verney really reflect his passions, one of which was the art of Naples. And he was collecting Neapolitan paintings for Compton Verney during the 1990s and 2000s, so a relatively kind of recently formed collection. And he became really known for his interest in Neapolitan art and managed to amass this remarkable collection, which numbers just over 50 objects. It includes paintings, decorative objects, sculptures, and they're all from the period of roughly 1600 to 1800. These are shown at Compton Verney in 3 continuous gallery spaces on the ground floor. And you're looking at on the right-hand side here of how the galleries looked at the start of the project, so before we got going. Compton Verney was formed by Peter Moores, and he was a very generous founder, but his involvement in the gallery also brought some restrictions. The collection was very much kind of displayed according to his tastes. And by the 2020s, we felt it was beginning to look a little bit tired and wasn't really working in the broader context of the visitor offer on site. The display felt quite static. And this is partly due to a number of very large paintings. So, for example, the Solimena painting on the end wall here, it's about 4 meters wide, so it can only really hang in one space in the gallery. And Peter Moores had kind of acquired paintings over time for the gallery spaces rather than as a collection in its own right. So he was often sort of buying things, thinking that'll look good above the mantelpiece or that'll look good on that wall. And that meant it was really quite fixed and static. And given that Compton Verney is in this kind of Georgian architectural interior as well, with lots of architraves and windows, it was very difficult to bring a sort of sense of movement to the collection. The display also felt a bit inaccessible, so there were room booklets, but no labels for any of the pictures. And that was, again, very much Peter Moore's wish. He thought it would be more accessible and inclusive to not have labels for the pictures. He didn't want to sort of tell people what to make of the collection. He wanted people to come in and just absorb the artworks in their own ways. But with very complex pictures, with quite, religious or mythological narratives, that was proving quite tricky for people, not necessarily rocking up with a big knowledge of the history of Naples in the 1600s and 1700s. And we found that people were just walking through these spaces quite quickly. They weren't lingering. There was no dwell time in front of the pictures, really. And particularly families were feeling that the space wasn't really for them. So moving on to the idea. The idea to redisplay the collection around the 5 senses was born during the pandemic. And at this time, I was keenly aware of how our senses were restricted. Very basic senses like touch. We weren't able to touch each other. and we couldn't really smell. We were wearing masks and things. And I also really resented not being able to travel, so not being able to fly anywhere or get on a train. And I suddenly thought, well, the Naples collection is really a perfect way to visit Italy from Warwickshire. Maybe we can make that trip without having to leave our kind of home areas. And this was, of course, the purpose of many of the pictures in the collection, which were produced often for kind of grand tourist market. So the wealthy young men who travelled to Europe and down to Naples, and they would buy these pictures as souvenirs of their journey. So the idea of using the senses as a hook into this collection felt very, very true to the works. Naples is quite unique, I guess. It's quite a wild stop on the grand tour, the third largest city in Europe after Paris and London at the time. And its natural kind of beauty and drama made it a very notable stop on the tour. There are kind of fiery volcanic eruptions. You can see Mount Vesuvius, which was active in the 18th and 19th century in the background here, smoking away. There was also very lively musical and theatrical life. And I really love the idea of thinking about how the five senses, all five senses, are what we tried to sort of address in our display, might transport modern audiences on their own kind of grand tour of Naples. So our intention was to create an experience of the collection that was multi-layered and accessible. We know everyone has senses, and at a very basic level, they can help us experience, and connect with the past. We were also really keen to engage family audiences, but we also wanted to think about current academic trends in sensorial research and how that might enrich our institutional understanding of the works in the collection. And the more time I spent with the collection, I began to see the many ways in which the works appealed to the senses. So we know, for example, that Mount Vesuvius was active throughout the 18th century, and we began to come across kind of accounts of visitors to Naples at the time, and I'll just read one now of a visitor to William Hamilton's house, who was the British representative in Naples. As soon as it was dark, the musical entertainment was mixed with the sight and observation of Mount Vesuvius, then very busy. Mr. Hamilton had glasses of all sorts. The sight was awful and magnificent, resembling on a great scale the most ingenious and splendid fireworks I ever saw. So this is clearly what's being depicted by artists in many of the paintings in the collection at Compton Verney. And here I think Valère uses a bit of artistic license in placing his spectators so close to the erupting volcano. But it's still clear that this was a very multi-sensory event, an inspirational event that included not just the sort of dramatic lights, fireworks in the sky, but it would also have included the heat and the smells of smoke and sulphur. In other pictures in the collection, such as these peasant scenes by Pietro Fabrice, peasant kind of festivities are alluded to, and I was particularly interested in the sounds that these paintings might have made. There's often kind of very traditional musical instruments being played. In other scenes from the collection, there are more refined instruments being played, such as the harpsichord. And we wanted to really dig into what music might have been played on these instruments at the time, and also to give visitors a sense of this too. The fertile volcanic soil and the hot sun meant that particular types of fruit and vegetables are associated with southern Italy. And these are shown in still lives in the collection. And like kind of Spanish paintings of the same period, these are highly accurate and very mouth-watering depictions of everyday foodstuffs. And they're so accurate that we could kind of start to identify, for example, different types of grapes in these still lives and how some were very particular to the rich soil in southern Italy. And so what we decided to do is to show these together as a kind of group of still lives and dive into the flavours of Naples. And finally, touch, which is also a kind of central sense, if you like, in so many of the religious works in the collection, where it seems to underline that connection between faith and the afterlife in this profoundly Catholic part of Europe. So we can see here touch binding together biblical scenes from the Virgin cradling the Christ child who's reaching for John the Baptist, to the resurrected Christ on the right-hand side inviting St. Thomas to touch his wounds. And touch is obviously one of the most restricted senses in an art gallery, but we wanted to think about how we might overcome that while obviously still keeping our collection safe. In thinking about how to use the senses and build connections with historic artworks, I was inspired by 2 exhibitions, neither of which I could visit, sadly, due to travel restrictions. So on the left, we have Fleeting, Scents in Colour at the Moritz House. And in this exhibition, curators paired paintings with the scents of the 17th century. And these included nice smells, like a clean linen cupboard, a bleaching field, but also foul-smelling scents, such as the odours of the canals. So that was, interesting, that idea again of having pleasant smells, but also unpleasant smells. And then on the right-hand side, and I had no idea that we'd have such expertise in the room today, I was really intrigued by this exhibition at the Prado around the Bruegel and Rubens painting On the Sense of Smell, where these 10 scents were picked out. So we knew that sensory approaches were being trialled in museums and galleries across Europe. But we had lots of questions at the start of the project about the suitability of this approach, the affordability of this approach, and also whether it would be appropriate for a permanent collection display. So we knew that we wanted to change this. This is kind of always open to our visitors. It's not a temporary exhibition. So whatever we were doing with smells or other sort of sensory interactions, we wanted to make sure it had this kind of longevity to it. And this is where our partners come in, really, and they were absolutely essential to conceiving and delivering this project. So one of the goals of the redisplay was to increase our institutional understanding of the Naples collection, try and raise its profile, and particularly given its international significance, build those links. We had a great partnership through a wonderful researcher and academic called Sarah Kozlowski, who is based at the University of Dallas, Texas, and she runs the Center for the Art and Architecture of Port Cities, which is a unique kind of academic partnership between Dallas and the Capodimonte Museum in Naples. This offers research residencies, a kind of program of online talks, which we were able to attend and give a talk at, and really fired our ambition to take quite a bold and new approach to the Naples collection. We also developed a research residency at La Capraia, which is the building that you're seeing in this image here in the grounds of the Capodimonte Museum, and worked with 2 doctoral researchers, Clara Baudet at the University of Oxford and Alessia Attanasio at the University of Birmingham, who both were able to deep dive into the iconography and different sensory approaches in the context of their doctoral research and add to our understanding of the works in the collection. Play research was also really important. So from 2021, our regular Tiny Tuesday session in the gallery was a kind of testing ground for ways to make families feel more welcome. And we consulted with lots of local families and organisations, working with MUF, which is an internationally recognised play practitioners whose work is a kind of collaboration between art and architecture. We started testing using open-ended play objects and a travelling table of play opportunities to see what people engaged with. And their feedback on this kind of prototype ways of playing informed the development of the displays. We also drew on kind of extensive knowledge within the learning team at Compton Verney, early years research into play, and this involved a team of about 4 to 5 people, including the artist Matt Shaw, an interdisciplinary artist with expertise in early years practice. And I'm showing some images of collaborations here. And all this meant that for the Naples project, we were well positioned to commission a permanent play structure for the galleries that drew on what we knew about children's preferences. And in the end, you're seeing the sort of outcome of that play research here. We commissioned designer and craftsman Nick Runnacles to develop an accessible volcanic play table, which sits in the centre of the galleries. This is kind of forwarding that idea of open-ended play. So it's loosely modelled on Vesuvius, and children are able to build their own city at the base of the volcano and then pump the handle, and the colourful kind of cork blocks explode and knock down the city that they built. And that's proved really, really popular. Financial support was really key. So we were lucky enough to be awarded a grant from the Wolfson Foundation, which made the redisplay possible. I also received a Jonathan Ruffer curatorial travel grant, which enabled me to travel to Naples, which was a wonderful chance to meet the team at the Capodimonte Museum and really immerse myself in the colours, smells, sights and sounds of the city. And this helped inform the design brief for the galleries, which take the colours of lapis lazuli blue and coral red, known as Naples red, as a starting point. But the scent collaboration that we were so keen to realise happened really quite accidentally. I was talking to a friend at a wedding about how I wanted to incorporate scents into the display, And it just happens that she worked for IFF and knew all about these kind of European projects. She immediately knew about the work at the Moritz House and knew the right person to connect us with. This had been delivered with the involvement of the European Research Project Ode Europa, which we've heard a bit about today already. And IFF agreed very kindly to create 6 new bespoke fragrances based on historic paintings from the collection for our display, and to supply these in a crystalline form, which were placed in glass bottles and could be easily refilled. So we have an image here of what we ended up with on the right-hand side. The kind of scent dispensers are mounted on the wall next to the paintings that they particularly relate to. And visitors are able to kind of create a puff of scent if they want to. So it's an optional addition to a visit rather than a kind of immersive experience from the outset. We chose the 6 scents very carefully so that there will be spaced intervals throughout the galleries, and we were obviously thinking there about the overall experience through the 3 galleries where the Naples collection is hung, and the sort of journey we wanted visitors to go on. And rather than having just one gallery devoted to scent, we kind of dotted them through all 3 of the spaces. And learning from the Moritz House example, we wanted to include smells that will be pleasant, as well as smells that will be less pleasant. So we did some research into this Paolo Porpora painting, for example, of a bouquet of flowers, came up with a list of all the flowers in the painting with the help of our landscape manager. And the team at IFF kind of particularly picked up on the rose, carnation, and tuberose in the painting and developed this very kind of rich, quite heavy and musky scent, which also I think really nicely evoked the kind of ripeness and decay in the painting. It's just kind of turning this floral still life. It's just on the verge of going over, and that's sort of what they wanted to encapsulate in the scent. We also had some nice sort of perfumed fragrances inspired by a portrait of a man holding leather gloves, and another kind of welcoming scent at the start of the galleries, which is based on the smell of orange blossom and sea air, the kind of thing you might smell as you as you arrive in Naples as a grand tourist. And then less pleasant smells that relate directly to paintings was that of sulfur and smoke for the volcano paintings, tobacco from a smoking pipe, and then finally fish being traded in the harbour, which is a real kind of quite quirky one that people do want to smell, but it's not the nicest of smells. Another element that we wanted to incorporate into the display was contemporary voices and arts, and I'm just going to whiz through this bit, but we were really keen to work with disabled artists on this project because we thought they would have a particularly heightened connection to the senses. And in developing the commission, we benefited from collaborating with the brilliant arts organisation Unlimited, who advised us on how best to structure the advert selection and commissioning process to ensure it was really as accessible as possible. And from this, we met and commissioned 2 artists to create new works for the collection. And you're looking on the right-hand side at Aaron McPeak's work, which is called Sensing Vesuvius. Aaron McPeak had a long career in stage lighting design, but lost most of his eyesight, so had to abandon that career and has now become an artist. And his sculptures and installations really invite us to engage and use our senses. What he's done with this work is used as the basis a chunk of volcanic rock, and this is from Vesuvius here at the bottom. And then he cast bell bronzes at the top, modelled on this rock. And these are bronze metal, and they're suspended from the ceiling. So when you touch them, you're allowed to interact and touch this artwork. They kind of chime together and make this really wonderful, very beautiful sound. So we wanted that kind of tactile and sound elements to come through, and we were really, really happy and delighted with his work that he created. The second work is a work by artist duo Displer, who took a very different approach. They were really interested in the 4 busts representing the 4 continents by Vaccaro, and they kind of reimagined these, creating 4 new films exploring colonial power. And these are shown as digital holographic living busts. So you scan a QR code and they kind of come to life in the gallery. So again, a very kind of hands-on, tactile approach to artworks that you wouldn't normally be able to touch or interact with. And finally, we were really keen to work with local partners and share the collection with people who might not come into the gallery. And undertaking a complete rehang meant we were able to make some decisions about the collection, and we wanted to see if a local school might want to borrow work from the collection. And we built this into the project from the outset. But I'm going to hand over to Annelise now to talk about the delivery of that and the kind of ongoing legacy of the project.
Right, I'm just realising, while Amy was talking, with her beautiful printed out version of her notes, my notes are on the bottom of the PowerPoint here, so I'm sorry if I'm looking this way. It doesn't mean that I don't want to be here. So, where are we? Delivery. Yes, so I oversaw the deinstall, the storage, and the reinstall of the collection, all of which happened while the rest of our building remained open to paying visitors, which presented some challenges, as you can imagine. So yes, having had our beautiful art history bit, this is now more of the sort of practicalities and the nitty-gritty of making what Amy had envisaged become a reality. So we have a wide variety of types of work in the collection. So there's vulnerable coral works, like the nativity scene that you can see here, has delicately wired figures, which are, obviously extremely small, extremely fragile, right up to the large paintings, like the huge Solomena that Amy mentioned earlier. So we had to really think carefully about how to approach this deinstall and where everything would be put. Just the practicalities, 50 pieces in 3 spaces. So the 3 Naples galleries are the very first spaces. Again, if you visited Compton Verney, you may know that there's 3 large spaces. They're the first spaces that visitors come to when they enter Compton Verney on the ground floor. Plus, they are also the only route to some of our other ground floor collections. So we obviously wanted to get the whole project done as quickly and efficiently as possible to reduce visitor impact. So we found a suitable alternative route so visitors could still visit the other gallery spaces. None of the galleries on this first floor have doors between them, so that caused another sort of slight headache to start with. So we had to barrier off with lots of layers of polythene to ensure that the Naples galleries weren't left, well, we had to also ensure that the galleries weren't left unattended, because otherwise a visitor sort of could find their way through and there would be an insurance problem. So yeah, a few little headaches. So we planned as much work as you can imagine on a Monday when we're closed to the public as we possibly could. So we decided to deinstall, store, paint, and then reinstall in 2 distinct phases to protect the work as best we could. First, we moved the largest and the most cumbersome works from Naples 2 and 3 into our Naples 1 space, rather than moving them to off-site storage, which would have put them more at risk. Almost the first work to be moved was this large Solomena, which again you've seen previously, which you can see on the left here. So it needed to be moved to the only suitable space, which was in Naples 1. Hope you're following all of this. On the right-hand side, you can see the very big Solomena painting, which is now propped against the back wall. So we then packed in our 4 marble busts by Vaccaro, various coral works, etc. We put them back into their showcases for safety. And obviously moving everything, all 50 pieces in the collection, into this Naples 1 space was not suitable for everything. So we just had to speak to our conservators and select a group for off-site storage for the period of the project. The rest, mostly smaller pieces, were then locked into one of our other gallery spaces on site. We needed quite a bit of space, as you can imagine, for all the travel frames. Here you can see them when they've just been delivered. We took advantage of having to move the works anyway to do a little bit of extra conservation cleaning. We prepared some works for being in longer term storage, like the tabletop that you can see at the bottom there. Once the galleries were empty, we sealed the doorways. We painted the first 2 spaces, making sure that there were no, well, I mentioned this earlier, no curious visitors who could stray under barriers and through polythene, just to have a little look. Didn't want that. So we then reinstalled Naples 2 and Naples 3 in their entirety. Here you can see some of the elements arriving for those 2 galleries before we even made a start at all on Naples 1. So here you can see the plinth for the Vaccaro busts being rolled into place and unpacked, and also the play table, which Amy mentioned earlier. I wanted to include the photo on the right. Oh yes, I wanted to include the photo on the right, not just because, as you can probably see, it has Amy at the back. Has Amy at the back, but also because you can see she's actually sort of peering through, coming through the polythene. So obviously at that point, you can see that we'd had to barrier off that space because we hadn't even started it at all. And yet also you can see there's a couple of painting here, large painting that's on blocks in the centre of the space. So quite a few elements to sort of just program in. So eventually we ended up with, here's Naples 1 that's been installed, some loans at the front here which were from Warwickshire Museum and Heritage, pieces of volcanic rock sample, and again you can also there see Aaron's work, which Amy mentioned earlier, behind, again all these relationships. So yes, here we are, Naples 1 looked like this. So, evaluation. What have we seen by way of visitor behaviour over the last 18 months? So, this is a little snapshot of all three of the spaces. Again, you can see the scent dispenser at the bottom left, etc., etc. So, as hoped, we've seen a huge increase in visitor numbers and length of time spent in the galleries. We've seen new ways to interact with the collection, which has meant visitors often have just little subtle things. We've noticed people having longer conversations with each other in the gallery spaces. People seem, I would say, noticeably more relaxed. There's feedback as well from front of house staff. So people are sometimes moving backwards and forwards through the spaces to go back and forth to listen to the sounds of Aaron's work as you move the bells together. People taking away one of the display prints and telling friends to do the same. In some cases, people pressing the button for the sound for two of the paintings, and then actually dancing as a family in front of a painting. It's been amazing to see. And telling family members which smells they like, which they don't, go back into that room. Have you smelt that one? All these kinds of nice conversations, much longer interactions. As you can imagine, again, from the reaction here when Amy showed you the image of the play table and explained about it, the play table is hugely popular. Again, as we'd hoped, with all different ages, multiple people at once. The loose parts play is working well. So yes, some people in a corner playing with the blocks. Not everybody wants to pump the volcano and make it erupt. And it's also been a chance to see a practical example of the fact that the thing that we all know, that people interact with things in very different ways. Front of house, certainly to start with, were very proudly, well, they've carried on doing this, very proudly saying that, you know, come to engage with the sense. And actually, as we talked about earlier, not everybody wants to. Finding different routes in. So it's meant also that some of our learning department activities in our adjoining Adam Hall space, not a gallery space, can easily and very simply bleed out into the Naples collection and sit alongside. And we've started to deliberately program this. We're finding that people coming from a learning space like that, they're not then changing their way of speaking, and they're speaking at usual volume. People are walking confidently across the galleries, laughing, families feeling their children can relax and sit down in the space. There's definitely less emphasis on what could be felt was anything imposing about the gallery spaces. So, what happened after Sensing Naples opened, and what's next? So just very briefly, I feel somebody's probably waving their hands at the back. Once the galleries were open, we started the plan project that Amy mentioned with our local secondary school. We loaned them the painting on the left, and Unlimited artist Aaron delivered workshops in the school facilitated by us. He even brought his own examples of volcanic material to inspire the students, deliberately very similar to the ones that we'd had on display in the galleries. On the other side of this image here, you can see little examples of scent bottles with exactly the same scents that we had in the gallery for students to have a go at smelling and be inspired by. So once we'd loaned the painting to the gallery, to the school, that's a Freudian slip, isn't it? To the, the head of art said that for a particular homework assignment, it was the very first time ever that all students had submitted a piece of work. So then we decided to hold an exhibition of students' work at Compton Verney from March to June 2024, so obviously some time after Sensing Naples had opened the previous year. So this included sound work, poems, paintings, drawings, models, materials as diverse as Lego, moss, etc. And after discussion with the wider team, we were able to use a dedicated space for this. So again, things had moved on slightly from even where it was planned when we first looked at the project. I'm just going to go back one slide because there's a couple more notes under here that I was just going to mention if I have time. Someone's going to turn off a button in a minute, aren't they? So yeah, the fact that we had a very long lead time initially with the school was a huge benefit to the project. We'd selected the painting to loan them well in advance of the redisplay entirely. We discussed at length how this would best work for the school. Would they even want it? Would they even have space for it? You know, we sort of arrived there expecting them to, you know, why should they sort of feel grateful for us saying you can have this historic painting and us jumping through hoops with insurers to allow them to have it? Would they have space or want it? They did. The head of art and their head teacher were very enthusiastic and, yeah, certainly a very, very big help to the project. So we selected a painting which had a link with as many areas of the curriculum as possible: art, geography, science, English, music. Yeah, there were a lot of hoops to jump through. I won't go through all of them now. With looking at things with their facilities teams and floor plans, and could we hang it in a space that then would mean that those different departments could get in. If it was hung in an art space, if it was hung in a library space, could there be enough room to do work alongside it, etc., etc. So all of that lead time was very, very useful, because it was quite hard to get hold of people from the school at one point. Obviously, they have important things to be doing. So, yeah, trying to get students through GCSEs and A-levels is a little more important necessarily than going, let's have a lovely picture from Compton Verney. So, yeah, having that lead time gave us that time to allow them to work in the way that was best for them. So we supplied, as I mentioned earlier, we supplied little examples of the scents to the schools. We gave them, you know, as easy as possible. We understand it's very practical detail, but just by putting these little bottles in bespoke sort of little plasters out in special boxes meant that then the teachers were more likely to use them, because it was easy to get the students to put them away at the end and tidy up, rather than having to have some special way of, you know, being packed in lots of layers of things, because these were, you know, little glass bottles with little stoppers, etc. So yes, we provided a lot of things to the school, and it meant that, as I say, they were very, very engaged, which was fabulous. Yes, so planning this project with the school, this bit of the legacy here, has been the first step to establishing a long-term relationship with that school. So we're now developing another project with them, again working with a living artist and a historic collection. So as suggested by them this time, we're going to be working with our folk art collection. So 2 pieces, one from around 1800, one from the early 20th century, have been selected by our folk art curator to allow us, allow them and us a chance to engage with as wide an area of the curriculum as possible. This time referencing agricultural practices which serve as a workshop prompt, and then we'll be rolling that out in spring 2025. So a very definite way that we're going to carry on working with that school across all different areas of our collections. Going back briefly to the play table, why not? Just to mention the fact that our learning team wants to put a lot of new ways of reactivating that together coming up. They want to look at storytelling, programming, way of making more a resource for their school visits as well, building on what we've done already. So, just going to end with some lovely quotes from our visitors. So yeah, thank you.